older brother used to do all kinds of stupid things for money, so when he came home one day and said somebody was gonna pay him $150 just to sleep for 3 nights in the laboratory, nobody really thought it sounded that weird. Dad actually said he'd do it himself if they were paying that much for sleeping, and Mom just kept asking if they'd done a background check because she thought it sounded like some kind of scam. But my brother kept saying it was a university study and everything was official, so a few days later he packed a backpack, got in his car, and drove there. He came back on Sunday morning looking exactly the same, and if I'm being honest, I don't think anybody noticed anything strange until dinner that night, because that's when Mom asked if he wanted more mashed potatoes and he leaned over to me like he was about to tell me a secret and whispered, "Who's that woman?" I laughed. I thought he was making fun of her. So I whispered back, "That's Mom." He looked at me for a second, then looked back at her, and I'll never forget the way he frowned because it wasn't the kind of face people make when they're confused. It was a face people make when they're trying really hard not to embarrass somebody. Like he honestly believed we'd invited some stranger over for dinner and nobody had bothered telling him. Then he quietly asked, "No, seriously, who is she?" I remember rolling my eyes because my brother loved stupid jokes, but when Mom asked what we were whispering about, he just smiled at her and said nothing, which somehow felt even stranger than if he'd kept the joke going. The next morning he asked me how long I'd been living in the house. Not like he forgot, more like he genuinely thought I'd moved in while he was gone. Then later that afternoon he asked if the woman in the kitchen was still staying with us, and I remember saying, "You mean Mom?" He looked embarrassed, almost guilty. Then he said something I still think about all the time. "She isn't my mom." He didn't say it dramatically. He wasn't trying to scare me. He sounded exactly the way you'd sound if somebody handed you the wrong backpack at school. Just calmly certain. For the next few days he kept saying little things that nobody else really noticed because none of them sounded scary on their own. He'd ask why our dog was suddenly golden when he'd always been black. He'd stop in the hallway and stare at family photos for a long time before quietly saying, "That's not where Dad used to stand." Or he'd ask me if I'd always had brown eyes. The weird part wasn't that he remembered things wrong. It was that he remembered them better than we did. He could tell you exactly what happened on Christmas 6 years earlier. He remembered every birthday, every vacation, every broken toy. It was just all the people in those memories were slightly different. About a week after he got home, I woke up because I heard somebody walking around upstairs, and when I went to see what he was doing, I found him standing in front of the bathroom mirror with the lights off, just staring at his reflection like he'd been waiting for something. I asked what he was looking at. He didn't answer. He just slowly lifted his hand and pointed into the mirror. "Do you know him?" he asked. I thought he meant himself, so I walked over and looked. At first I only saw my brother. Then, for maybe a second he wasn't there anymore. There was another kid standing where he should have been. He was about the same age, same height, but he wasn't my brother. Different face, different hair, different clothes. He wasn't pointing at himself. He was pointing at me. And then something happened that still doesn't make any sense. He looked relieved, like he'd finally found somebody he'd been looking for. I blinked. The mirror was normal again. My brother finally looked away and smiled for the first time since he'd come home. Not because he recognized himself. Because he'd recognized the other boy. He looked at me and said, "I knew I wasn't the one who came back wrong." Then he went upstairs, packed a backpack, and left before sunrise. Nobody has seen him since. Mom still thinks he ran away. Dad says whatever happened in that laboratory probably damaged his memory. Maybe they're right. I don't know. But a few months ago I walked past the same bulletin board where he'd found that flyer. It was still there. Same laboratory. Same address. Same $150. The only difference was that somebody had written something underneath it with a black marker. I don't know if it had always been there. Maybe nobody noticed before. It just said, "Before you leave, make sure you're going home with your own family."